Let's begin our program now. Should the name of Washington Lee High School be changed? The question of how we in Virginia and in states throughout the South recognize our history is not a new topic, but it has risen higher on the agenda this year in many different venues across the Commonwealth. And while seemingly very straightforward, there are challenging questions that arise when we look more closely. How should we understand monuments to individuals who fought for the Confederacy? Are they necessarily monuments to the cause for which they fought? Or is it possible to distinguish individuals from the system? Can we acknowledge the evils of slavery while recognizing the other contributions of those who participated in that terrible system? For example, what, if anything, is the proper way to acknowledge Robert E. Lee's service to the United States in the Mexican War, or his work after the Civil War to bind the nation's wounds? What is the right venue for that recognition? And who should be deserving of honor in place names? And how should that honor be placed into context? How do we tell the entire story, the good and the bad, so that future generations can learn from experiences of our past? And how do we account for unrelated associations that place names have from generations that have come before or since? In the case of schools, how do we weigh the sense of school pride that students or alumni have in the identity of their alma mater, whatever its name is? Or in another example, Stratford is the name of Robert E. Lee's birthplace. But what about the two signers of the Declaration of Independence who also lived there? Does the name of the middle school not too far from here conjure up memories of any of those people? Or does one think first of the African-American students who made it Virginia's first desegregated school in the face of massive resistance in 1959? As you all no doubt know, here at Committee of 100, we value the opportunity to ask questions and to learn from the discussion of those questions. But I can't think of any program where I've attended where the chair's introduction began with 10 straight questions until now. And I have just scratched the surface. There is much to consider, and tonight we hope to ask those and other questions with the goal of us each learning more and hopefully making the discussion of this challenging topic a positive and fruitful conversation for Arlington. Now, you may have noticed that our topic is much more specific than the introduction has been to this point, and that is intentional. We know that discussing the particulars of Washington Lee High School is not occurring in a vacuum, but we want to anchor this conversation for several reasons. First, Arlington Public Schools has convened an engagement process on its school naming policy, so the WL name is timely. Second, our school names are solely within the purview of Arlington officials representing Arlington residents. We cannot dodge this question by punting to the General Assembly in Richmond. And third, while some people will want to change every name with a Confederate tie and some people will insist on changing nothing, I suspect that many will look at these questions and want to chart some middle path. Change some names, keep some but add extra context, and perhaps leave others be. And by focusing on this specific instance, what I hope is that we can all think about what we ultimately want for this school, and then work through our own inductive process to think about the outcomes we want to see in general. As a reminder, the Committee of 100 is a neutral, non-aligned organization dedicated to learning about what is impacting our community. As such, we will feature speakers from both sides of the question about whether to change Washington Lee's name. Furthermore, the Committee of 100 does not take positions on this or any issue. Rather, we hope that everyone here will be able to use what you learned in forming your own viewpoint and your own civic engagement on the issue. To that end, we have invited 3 speakers for our program this evening. 1 to provide some background, and 2 to discuss the particular issue as it relates to Arlington. First, we will hear from Campbell Palmer, who is a parent at and current president of the athletic boosters for Fairfax's JEB Stuart High School, which will be renamed Justice High School in this coming school year, following a similar community process there. We have asked Campbell to join us to provide some perspective on the experience in Fairfax. He was part of the FCPS ad hoc committee on the name change, and his subcommittee's charge was to identify the anticipated costs of that change and to seek public and private partnerships that could help defray the cost. I will note that Campbell was personally against the name change, but we are not here to relitigate that. That was a decision in Fairfax, for Fairfax, and by Fairfax. WL will be a decision for us in Arlington. Next, Michael Beer will join us. Michael has lived in Arlington County since 2003, is a familiar face to many Arlington civic activists. He is an APS parent and an APS spouse. His wife, LaTanya, has taught here since 1991, and one of their children may be attending WL in the autumn. And Michael also serves as the co-chair of the Civic Federation's Schools Committee, and he is in favor of changing the name of Washington Lee. And finally, we'll welcome John Peck. John is a 1996 Washington Lee grad, is an active member of the Alumni Association, and is currently a board member of the Washington Lee High School Education Foundation, which raises money for student scholarships and teacher fellowships. John serves on the county's Historical Affairs and Landmark Review Board and the APS Facilities Advisory Committee. He is against changing the name. I will note that although I gave organizational affiliations for all three speakers, I did so for identification purposes only. Each speaker is speaking for himself and himself alone. All right, enough setup, enough of me. We have much to learn tonight, and so without further ado, I'd like to welcome Campbell.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you to Arlington County for inviting me to this experience. And so let me just first start off by letting everybody know I am not an expert in anything that we're talking about tonight. I want to make that crystal clear. I am a community member of the JEB Stuart High School community. I am a parent of 3 children, one 17 who's a junior, an athlete at the high school, and I was very proud to have been asked, even prior to his arrival at the school, to help take part in the JEB Stuart Booster Athletic Department and try to help with the fundraising. So I got my feet wet by putting on the Raider Run, which, by the way, everybody is invited to attend. It's going to be May 15th. We would love to see you running in that race. But aside from that, I really learned the ropes of what it takes to be a fundraiser in a high school environment. And really wanted to express to you the lessons learned that I saw as what I ultimately became as a community leader, dealing with the subject of changing the name of the high school. So a little bit about JEB Stuart. First off, it's a very diverse community. So we have the Lake Barcroft area where we, I would say, have a lot of the upper echelon in our IRS TAC bracket. Very successful individuals, and at the same time, JEB Stuart High School is 68% of the students are free and reduced lunch. So a very diverse school. But again, that school is very well knit. The community has come together. There are many, many friends within the school itself, as well as within the community, and all closely tied through the high school. Another want to point out with the volunteer effort that we've been putting forth, I would say roughly 5%, maybe 10% of all the parents associated with the school are fundraising roughly 90% of all the revenues that are coming in. So that means that we're essentially doing a majority of the work on behalf of the community, but it's the pride of the school that we have, and it's the love of our students and the activities that they take part in. That includes the orchestra, that includes music, that includes athletics, you name it. Those parents are there taking part, and they are directly impacted as to what these decisions have been made. I work at a company down the street called CenturyLink Communications. I work in the federal sales division, and one thing that I was thinking about today as I was thinking as to what I'll be speaking about is we have a screensaver that comes up on all of our computers. None of us have a choice as to what our own screensavers are going to be. It's pushed down by our IT department. And in this screensaver that comes up, we have our guiding principles of the high school, or of our business. Those guiding principles include integrity, accountability, trust, respect, ownership, and above all, being nice. I cannot tell you how much would have changed in our community if those guiding principles would have been followed from the beginning as we started with this whole process of making that decision, whether or not we're going to change the name of this school. Let's start with integrity. First and foremost, integrity and accountability I would intertwine with one another. You're going to say that integrity is you're going to be you're a part of your word, you're being honest, open, and truthful. That is crucial when you're making this decision. Be open and honest with your community members. As you're working to make these decisions, you're going to be listening to others. Make sure that that is taking place. Do not be divisive in whatever your decisions are or as your community is discussing with one another the topic of a name change. Accountability. First and foremost, are you willing to fundraise? Are you willing to bring in private funds within your community to try to help facilitate the cost of this name change? If so, make that commitment early, and those that are making that commitment, hold them accountable. Anybody that says we can just bring in money and that money is going to flow into this community because we know that that's just going to happen, that's blind. Just make sure that if people are saying that they can fundraise, I know they can. I've been fundraising now for the past 4 years, and I know what my capabilities are within the boosters organization that I run. I know what we're capable of funding and what we're able to obtain funds for. If this is a very passionate endeavor for members within this community, stand up to the fact that if you're going to fund this, you can find a way and do so. Be inclusive. All opinions matter. Do not try to divide members within this community just because they have a differing opinion of yours. Make sure that you listen to everybody. It is only fair to hear their point as well as yours. You never know, they may change your opinion and you may change theirs. But first and foremost, as you are working through with this decision making, are you going to allow outside influence, such as Fairfax County members, to come in and help you make your decision? If so, be decisive and make that decision early. Do not have situations that arise where certain community members invite outside members to come in, and it creates, again, an area of divisiveness and pain. Respect. Everybody, again, has an opinion. I encourage everybody to express it and share the respect of everybody that's a part of this decision-making process. It is crucial that everybody be able to listen. And I'm going to take a side moment here and also point out that in situations like this, the internet is not your friend. Everybody in our neighborhood is part of a listserv. Listservs are great for finding a plumber. Listservs are great for looking for an electrician or letting your friends know that you have some toys for sale in your front yard. You will not persuade or change anybody's opinion on a listserv. It will only create anger and venom, and everybody that sits behind a keyboard can be readily aware as to how nasty things can get when you're sending those messages, and all you have to do is hit send and it's done. Be open about the funds and the costs. And what I mean by that is you're going to have people that are going to be responsible for figuring out what this is going to cost. How much does it take? What revenue is going to be required to change the name of that school? Are we going to be changing uniforms? Are we going to be changing the logo of the school? What is necessary to change the name of that high school? When you look to find people that are going to be changing that name, or if the decision is made to change that name, you need to trust that those that are doing that, those prices are not negotiable. That is not a topic for discussion. That is the fixed rate, and people that are coming in to say, nope, we can do this for $15 less than what you stipulated, all that does is that opens the room up for argument. There's no need for that. Trust in those that are decided or that have been selected to identify what the price is going to be, and that's the price that you guys have to get to. I would also encourage everybody as you're looking to consider a fundraising effort, reach out to those that are already fundraising. Make sure that those that are supporting the same high school that you're talking about changing the name of, that you're not impacting the efforts that they put forth in their fundraising endeavors. The JEB Stuart Boosters, our job is to help fund the day-to-day operations of our district's, what's the DSA stand for? The athletic department, the leader of the athletic department. That means that the day-to-day operations are responsible. We are not looking 2-3 years out in terms of the fundraising that we're putting forth. We do look to local businesses and we do look to local community members to help fund what our day-to-day operations are. As you're looking to make a long-term change, please be certain that you're communicating with other booster members to be certain that you're not taking away or reaching out to the same businesses that they would rely on for that day-to-day operation, because ultimately that will impact the day-to-day and the operational organization of those particular boosters programs. And finally, be decisive. Decide early who is going to be making this change. Is it going to be the school board? Is it going to be a commissioner? Is it going to be the state? Whatever that decision is made, that's the decision that you stick to. You can even take this to a vote. If there's a community vote that's decided, or even an Arlington-wide vote, stay with that decision. There's nothing more painful than being told as a community member that you're going to be holding a vote, only to find that that vote that you were held to, and the outcome of that vote has absolutely nothing to do with the bearing of the decision making of that school. So if you're going to have a vote, that's the decision that you've made. Finally, be nice. Everybody in the room, we know each other in some form or fashion. Just remember, it's just a name. This relationship that you have with your neighbors and your friends, that's going to go on well past whatever this high school's name is. So just remember, be friendly, be nice, and good luck.
Thank you. Now my pleasure to welcome Michael Beer.
Thank you, Scott, for your leadership here. And I want to thank maybe Duke Banks here for having recommended me, recruited me. I don't know how I got up here. I'm not an expert either. So if I bomb tonight, you can blame Duke. I want to thank Libby here specifically for all of her many years of service, particularly on the school board. And Patrick for his good service down in Richmond and trying to get more money for our schools, which we need. And thank you, Campbell, for sharing from your experience. It's very helpful to hear that, and I hope we learn from you and follow your guidelines. Washington Lee High School's name should be changed as soon as possible. Names for public spaces should be used to remember and inspire. Unoriginal, damaging, or hateful names should be changed. Lee's name must be removed. An alternative to Washington should be considered. Let's put the needs of our children first. APS is working methodically to review its naming policies and practices with full public input. Renaming and change itself can be a wonderful opportunity to bring Arlingtonians together. Those are the main points I will be making in the next few minutes. We have wonderful names for our public spaces in Arlington, including the recent decision to name the county office building after Ellen Bozeman. We have the new Fleet School, Discovery Elementary School, Drew Elementary, Hoffman Boston, and so many names. We hope our children will remember and honor these people and principles. Here's a text of the letter I wrote that was recently published in the Sun Gazette. Arlington has not rooted out symbolic lionization of the Southern pro-slavery rebellion and Jim Crow. The county's board, the school board, civic federations, and our state government should deconstruct and marginalize the Confederate narratives manifested in Arlington monuments, streets, schools, neighborhoods, civic associations, and symbols, included but not limited to Bedford, Jefferson Davis, Old Jefferson Davis, Stewart, Bryan, Dinwiddie, Stafford, Stratford, Lee, Leeway, Overlee, Tara, and Randolph. The U.S. must stamp out veneration for racial supremacy and the appalling carnage caused by the rebellion. So that was the letter I put in the Sun Gazette. Our public schools, streets, and parks should be named in ways that honor our histories, our culture's sense of place and values. Names do not require unanimous support, but when large groups of people are offended or disturbed, we must be willing to listen and be prepared to respond to reasonable requests of change, even if they are symbolic. Robert E. Lee is not a person worthy of reverence or honor. There is not time to outline his flaws. We can get into that if you want to. The more important point is that even if you think that Lee is a flawed yet exceptional person worthy of having a school named after him, we still must erase his name from all public monuments because the myth of Robert E. Lee is central to lost cause ideology that continues to harm our society to this day. I quote from Adam Sewer of the Atlantic Magazine's article, The Kindly Myth of Robert E. Lee. The myth of Lee's grace is a central part of the lost cause ideology used to justify racial apartheid in the South after Reconstruction. The myth of Lee goes something like this. He was a brilliant strategist and devoted Christian man who abhorred slavery and labored tirelessly after the war to bring the country back together. The myths both about Lee and the Confederacy, his supposed hatred of slavery, his non-ownership of slaves, and his conduct during the war, and his reasons for fighting it, are all sustained by the statues and monuments that honor him. The reverence for the people represented by these monuments interferes with the proper remembrance of history. It does not enhance it. You don't need a statue or a school of Lee to understand why white Southerners revered him. You need a book. The statue can go in a museum, unquote. Some have argued that the school is named after the Lee family. Given the time in which the school was named in the early 20th century, it is implausible that the school was named without Robert E. Lee in mind. Had he died before the Civil War, this school in Arlington would not be named after General Light Horse Harry Lee or the Greater Lee family. Attempting a reinterpretation at this time is not going to work. What about Washington's name? Washington was also a slave owner who supported a rebellion, a portion of which supported slavery. Should we be dropping his name? It's a good question. I think this is worthy of discussion. Not so much as to denigrate Washington, but let's face it, the name is not exactly original. There are 88 place names, including a state, Washington, D.C., and 55 counties named after Washington, 12 colleges and universities, 5 mountains, and countless schools. Naming it after someone or something else that may be additionally worthy of honor has strong merit. Let's put the needs of our children first. Racism and European supremacism continues to harm our society and children. We have deplorable academic achievement gaps. Racism is not just a historical problem. Vestiges of the caste system cause suffering and injustice every day. We must find a name that can inspire young students. Do we want European American children to idealize Lee and his lost cause? Do we want African American kids to attend a school named after a man who more than most denigrated and harmed people of African descent? Do we in Arlington really want to continue to romanticize the lost cause of racism? I'll just add that recently at a board meeting, very recently, a Washington Lee student stood up and introduced himself to the school board and spoke, and he said, "I come from Washington High School." The school board is engaged in a process of revisiting its naming policies and procedures. I have copies of the policy, which is very, very short. I can read it to you. And the procedures, which is 2 pages long. I have a few handouts of those, and I have copies to pass them around. It's important to know that the school board has made no decision to even begin to think about changing Washington Lee's name. They are engaged in a public process now to revisit the policy of naming and getting public input generically on naming, because not only is Washington Lee up possibly for renaming, but we also have a situation in which we have new schools coming online. And so what might we name new schools? Renaming a public space is not just something to be afraid of. And that's what I fear what we got from Campbell here, is that there's only the negative side. Renaming a public space can be a wonderful opportunity for renewal. We have a wonderful opportunity to forge a better future by finding a new name for the high school. A name change will be a symbolic change to reaffirm our commitment to a beloved society and a just society and a merit-based society. The process of discussing history and deciding on a new name has value as well as the new name that is chosen. I think we can actually bring our community even more closely together, because we still have members of our community who are left out. That concludes my remarks.
All right, we'll give the projector a moment to get going. But while we do that, I'll welcome our third speaker, John Peck.
First, thank you for asking me to spend tonight to talk about this topic, thanks to the Arlington Committee 100. And it's good to see friends on both sides of the issue tonight. I appreciate those that showed up. Thank you. I'll admit that preparing for this event has been one of the most difficult projects I've ever undertaken. Please forgive me if I fall short in my arguments tonight. My way out is I have a good job offer in Portland and Seattle, so I could be out of here. Over the years, well, I am the school's volunteer historian, kind of an unofficial position. I've interviewed and met countless W&L alumni and former faculty over the years, and many of them have since passed on. I've also created and contributed to the official W&L history website over the past 20 years, with much invaluable help from alumni and the school. So I do bear a special burden. As our high school's identity, its most outwardly familiar characteristic, its name, may disappear. It is undeniable that the school's name, Washington Lee, symbolizes the stories and accomplishments of generations of Arlington students and alumni. What makes W&L special are the connections to 40,000 past alumni and its incredible legacy. The school so named has brought us together multiple generations. Equally important is that the school name symbolizes a living history. The Washington Lee story is still being written. The name is an indelible part of it and should not be changed. I'll briefly mention that the Alumni Association, the W&L High School Education Foundation, and other initiatives like the Athletic Hall of Fame have all played a key role in connecting the school with alumni. And alumni have enthusiastically donated their time to giving back to the school to help students in their high school journey. Most recently, alumnus Steve Buckhantz recently joined one of our W&L student announcers to provide play-by-play commentary during a varsity basketball game. Another famous alum, artist John Friedman, assisted with the restoration of his John F. Kennedy mural in the school. His work is on display at the Smithsonian. Behind me, you'll see the W&L Historic Marker, which had been planned for installation early in September, a project funded by the school's alumni. It celebrates nearly 100 years of student achievement, and its purpose is to teach and inspire. Unfortunately, though understandably postponed for installation due to the current name controversy, we hope it will be installed in the future. The historic marker only scratches the surface. It only begins to explain how Washington Lee became one of America's great public high schools, and why alumni and many Arlingtonians are so attached to the school. The official History and Archives website goes a little deeper, but it is still and will likely always be a work in progress. Invite everyone to please navigate to the history website on the official W&L homepage on the About Us section. Also, all the yearbooks are scanned online. It's a great archive for people who want to dig in. So, while the 93-year story of the school is a positive one, there are also challenging times which W&L students overcame. The school and the community became stronger. Generally, over time, it is an uplifting story. With a marker behind me, I'll share some of those milestones. The Cadet Corps and Girls Auxiliary comprised the first JROTC of any school in Northern Virginia. I had the honor of interviewing Bob McAtee, class of 1932, a proud member of the Cadet Corps, on more than one occasion. A photo of his is on the marker. W&L students who sacrificed their lives for our country in World War II are honored by a memorial plaque, which is in the school but needs to be put back up. And one recent W&L graduate was able to locate the graves of those W&L students who were killed during the Normandy invasion and buried in France this past year because of that marker. I've often heard from alumni about Wayne Ballard's field goal on Thanksgiving Day, 1956, that lifted W&L over rival George Washington to win the state title in the final seconds. One of the most legendary games in high school sports history. Of course, we all know about the W&L championship crew teams that won the Henley Royal Regatta in England. In the 50s and 60s, the school set a high standard for academic excellence and was ranked among the most elite public high schools in the country by Time, Ladies' Home Journal, and other publications. I do believe the school still lives up to those high standards. W&L, like nearby Stratford Junior High School, featured prominently in Arlington's efforts to integrate schools against the state's racist massive resistance policies in the 1950s. The 5 brave students who integrated W&L in 1959 laid the foundation for the subsequent remarkable unity of the W&L student body. Like Stratford, the W&L integration story needs to be fully told. Charles Oggins, one of those 5 brave students, invited me to share his thoughts with all of you today on the name change controversy. He wrote, in 1959, along with Joyce Struthers, Warren Hunter, Stephen Taylor, Louis Costley, and myself, we walked into W&L with great fear and trepidation. For us, it was a historic moment, and as such should remain part of history. While I don't always agree with the events that make history, it is not in my power to change it. Washington Lee High School is what it was and what it should be. The 1966 state basketball champions. It was the first integrated team in the state to win the state championship. It symbolized the school's remarkable spirit of unity, and W&L became a model for schools throughout the state. In 1969, 1 year after the formation of a similar program at Berkeley High School in California, 39 students signed up for W&L's inaugural Black Studies course taught by Peggy Jeans, my AP government teacher many years later. W&L had one of the first and only such programs in a public high school. I spoke with her yesterday about the program and the civil rights movement at Washington Lee. She recalled that Marion Barry, later mayor of DC, came to speak to 800 students in a packed auditorium about Pride Inc. and civil rights issues. She had fond memories of her classes and students. By 1967, over 10% of W&L's population was foreign-born and from 32 different countries. Along with Western High School in DC, W&L was one of the most diverse area high schools. W&L, many people don't know this, has been home to an international population since its earliest years in the late 1920s. As one can observe through the school's yearbooks and through conversations with older alumni, the school has always tried to be a welcoming place for students new to the country. Of course, other milestones. President Obama's addressed the student body in 2012, the 2016 state soccer championship team. Today's students inherit this history and will hopefully learn from it. I can tell you with 100% certainty that never once, as a student or as an alum, was I under the impression that our school was a Confederate themed school or one that glorified the now disgraced relics from that era. The school's yearbook archives are all online, so please do look through them. You will not find any Confederate imagery. A couple brief notes only in the school name. For me, the origin of the school name is of lesser importance to me, so I will not dwell on it, or Lee for that matter, but it is an inspiring story nonetheless. Arlington House, built as a shrine to George Washington, became the nation's memorial to Robert E. Lee in 1925. According to the National Park Service, today's Arlington House is preserved as a memorial to Robert E. Lee in honor of his dedication to peace and reconciliation after the Civil War. A few weeks after the dedication, Washington Lee was chosen as the name for the new high school by the school board. I reject the notion, which some believe through conversation, that the KKK may have influenced the naming of the school. There is no proof of that. We do have written evidence that the school board in 1926 rejected a request by the KKK to hold a public religious meeting at the school. I encourage everyone to please read up on Robert E. Lee with an open mind and visit the Arlington House, the Robert E. Lee Memorial. One book I recommend, which some of you already know about, is Lee the Last Years, or I'll say that again, Lee the Last Years by Charles Brayson Flood. The story of Lee is one of redemption, and I believe we can all learn from it. In conclusion, I'd like to share some final thoughts from an op-ed I helped write, but has not yet been published, and I'll see how far I can get through this. Named after Washington Lee University in Lexington, is published in the school's archives, while simultaneously honoring historical figures from Arlington's past, George Washington, and Robert E. Lee. The school opened on a segregated basis in 1925, like other public schools in the region. While Washington, D.C. was then a sleepy southern town, a large number of students at W&L came from other states, and a few from abroad as far away as Asia and Latin America. Mabel Allen, W&L's cherished Latin teacher in those early years, instilled a sense of tolerance in her students, and her words are preserved in a plaque at the school today, Foveat Diversitates, or cherish the differences. Portraits to Washington and Lincoln were in fact displayed in the library, not in like other schools throughout the country. In 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the school newspaper published the following patriotic ode to our country's values. Okay. I'll give you the quote, it's quite inspiring. Fighting for democracy is nothing new in our history. Decisive battles have been fought for it by the father of our country, George Washington, by the great emancipator, Abraham Lincoln, and a mere 20 years ago, by our own fathers and uncles. Our appreciation is symbolized by the impressive monuments erected to them in our own capital city. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I would now like to invite all three of our speakers to join us at the table here. As they get into their places, we will now begin the question and answer session. So with that, questions, we'll begin over here.
I've been around a long time, guys. I'm from North Carolina, and I lived my first 24 some years there, and then mostly here in Virginia. It took me until a few months ago to realize that Robert E. Lee and all the other Confederates were traitors to the United States of America. And we have no business naming any public edifice
Question, Max?
Should we name public edifices for traitors? That's my question.
Michael here. I'm not aware that there's any edifice or school or place named after Benedict Arnold. But, you know, in history, one person's traitor, or one group's traitor is another group's hero. And so that makes things complicated, and George Washington was seen as a traitor by many in the United States.
So if we were to hypothetically entirely hypothetically, go the route of making a name change, what, in each of y'all's perspectives, could be appropriate? You know, I think it ranges here, but what would be appropriate boundaries of where do you draw the line on these are the absolute name changes that would need to happen, these are the ones that would need to happen? What kind of guide, and I don't mean specifics, just what kind of guidelines and what kind of questions would we need to ask to make those determinations?
So that was one of the more interesting aspects of the JEB Stuart renaming process, was they opened that up, so they were very decisive. When I say they, it's the school board that made the decision and took the leadership to isolate the decision-making for the name within the community. They opened up, one household gets a vote for a name that they wanted to have a selection for. Every household had the ability to come in and have one designated personnel and write down whatever name they wanted to put forth as part of the overall process. So that was actually relatively enjoyable to see a lot of the names that were showing up. From that point, they took most of the names. They took away the ones that were relatively not so serious. Schoolie McSchoolface showed up on more than one occasion by many students. And that's when they opened it up to a community-based vote. And that's where we ran into an issue. The community vote had no bearing with the decision that was made for the renaming of the high school, but at least opening it up to the community as to what that potential name could be was actually quite enjoyable.
I think that's a wonderful question. I don't have all the answers on it. In terms of process, which is not exactly what you're talking about, I think the school board has put forward a very slow, steady process, at least for the names of schools. That's going to involve a lot of public input. And with regards to all of the other street names that I put forward and whatnot, we can all see scenarios in which renaming can be taken to an extreme. And you know, all of these ancestors were patriarchal. Are we going to not name schools after people who are patriarchal? You know, they all probably, most of them oppressed, you know, left-handed people, which sounds funny, but in fact, you know, for folks growing up left-handed 100, 200 years ago, it was not such a fun situation. Or we can go on and on with other kind of categories. I don't know where the extremes start and stop. I'm very much focused on the future, what's best for our kids, what's best for our country, and we have some severe divisions and problems in our society that are vestiges of Jim Crow and slavery. And so, wonderful question and query, and I don't have a full answer for you.
I'm Christine Montemac, and What I'm hearing tonight, and I've read in the paper and so forth, is a lot of focus on the feelings of alumni of this wonderful high school. And I don't want to dismiss that. I came to Arlington 30 years ago. I grew up outside of New York City. I was really shocked when I moved into an apartment building, Jefferson Davis Highway. The question I have is related to the first one. How should we take into account people's feeling of offense at a name which is a public honor? I, for instance, would be very angry at a Harvey Weinstein school or a Charlie Rose school.
Thank you. So question, regardless of your view,
I definitely empathize for those that would take offense at Blvd League, for example. For me and for many alumni, you know, the name symbolizes something completely different. I don't think about generally. In fact, I wouldn't mind if the portraits were taken down in the school, or if the, you know, the profile logo that was, you know, that's used on school materials, if that, you know, if that was erased. Washington and Lee University, they don't use, although the Washington Lee High School seal is based on the Washington and Lee University seal, which was created in the 1800s. Washington and Lee University no longer uses it except under extreme rare circumstances. It's still official, but they don't really use it. So I think WNL, like many high schools, they just seek to create an image, a mascot. You know, it's just a natural thing to do. But you know, I don't think it's necessary, especially if people find offense, you know, at looking at a portrait of Lee. For me, you know, that means nothing. It's the name of the school has to do with its legacy, the students, its past, its future. But that's just my personal opinion, and I'm sure there are many that disagree.
Hi, Chris Monroe, class of 2003, Washington Lee High School. You know, I've heard a lot of issues about what value it has, what an alumni thinks, what an elected official thinks, what value it has that a new member to the community has on this issue. Regardless of what the actual decision-making process is and what officially is going to happen, how do you each feel, or who do you think should be in charge of making this decision and why, personally?
So again, going back to what, having just experienced this myself as part of the community at JEB Stuart, I really do think that this is an opportunity to bring your community together. If you have made the decision to change the name of that school, put it up to a vote. Keep it isolated within your own community and allow that community to decide what that name is going to be. But when that decision is made, that's the decision that you stand behind.
Sure, I think I can agree with that. I haven't put too much thought into it, but it does seem like a fair way to go about doing this. It is in fact how other school districts, or I shouldn't say school districts, maybe jurisdictions around the country are dealing with the same issue. Although I haven't read up on it recently, I think Stanton, Virginia, they had a vote maybe 4 or 5 years ago on their high school. They voted to keep the name. It's Robert E. Lee High School. I don't know if there's any current discussion around that school now, but I do like the idea of a community vote.
The current practice is that the school board names a school naming committee that's made up of a broad range of people. And that committee then comes forward to the school board with a proposal. But the school board right now is opening up this very, very question. They're opening up the question, how should we actually go about this the practice of naming or renaming? And if there's very strong desire for folks to go to a citizen vote, this could be implemented in the near future if the school board agrees with this idea. So please give your thoughts to the school board if you'd really like to see a community voting approach to naming the high school. I just say there's one caveat or concern, and that is that, if we're concerned about the rights of minorities and we're just talking about tyranny of the majority, which is what democracy is, we have to be very careful about the downsides to what a public vote might be. But there's some good arguments for it.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Douglas, class of 2018. I guess my question is, it feels like when we have these conversations all the time, it's about what the alumni think, not what the current students think. I'm one of the people who goes into the Washington Lee every day, has to be reminded as a student of color about that painful history. So my question is just, how do we make sure there's a parity in this discussion? How do we make sure that everyone's voice is being heard, not just the alumni? Thank you.
No, I agree. I believe students definitely need to be heard. I think all stakeholders in the community need to be heard. I don't think there's any reason why not to. I also hope that, for all of us involved in this process, we all educate ourselves as much as we can behind, the history of the school and, in addition to our own feelings.
My name is John Quinn. All of the arguments that have been presented and that frankly I can imagine are emotionally oriented, emotionally based. Has anybody looked at the question philosophically? What is the best practice that any decider, whoever that is, should use in order to determine a name for a building or a place that's going to have long-term, if not permanent, endurance? And if so, what are those standards? What is that standard?
So one of the hopes that I had as a fundraiser, and actually being part of a committee that was to identify the cost of changing the school, I was very hopeful that we, on JEB Stuart's side, were going to find another name that started with the letter S. Because I cannot tell you how much money that would have actually saved our school in the time of having to change the name. Now, W&L may be a little more difficult to find matching letters, but trying to at least minimize the overall change that would have to take place within the school will greatly enable you to make that decision as to what you want that school name to be moving forward.
I think that, hypothetically, if, we come to that crossroads where, say we need to come up with different Washington and different Lee. If you wanted to keep those two names, I think there are many Washingtons, a few Washingtons, probably a few more Lees to choose from, to consider. I know it's something alumni I've heard just through grapevine have talked about.
I think principles of inclusion and justice, but in terms of process, I really like the idea. I don't think there's any one way to do this, but I would really hope that we can, as a community and communities, use this as an opportunity to get closer and to understand each other's experiences better. So that would be a fundamental approach. As you know, I'm advocating for going beyond school board, just doing the school, but I think we need to take a look at the names of our streets and the other public monuments that we have, which would involve other county board and other discussions, other groups.
I was just wondering, hearing people talk that it would be good to have a vote, but who would get to vote? Alumni who don't live in the district? How about parents without children? How about students who aren't of voting age? How about, as I say, parents who don't have children but still live there? They're all stakeholders. And so who gets to vote and who will certify the people who vote? That would be a difficult question.
So again, just hearkening back to where we just had this similar environment, it was decided at that within our district, that the vote was going to take place within the boundaries of the school district. So who was a member, who was able to send their children to that particular high school, had one vote per household. What that made it somewhat fun for our household was we had a vote within our house. So you're going to have one member on behalf of your household that's going to have that vote, that's then going to cast that vote that's within the community that you're able to send your children to. So you're having votes within votes. But it sparked conversation, and it sparked really, this is how democracy can work, with the stark issue at the end where democracy did not work that way, and that's where the kids learn another lesson for another day.
I think this question of renaming Washington Lee comes in the backdrop of the Charlottesville incident. So what is our responsibility in choosing to tackle that issue of white supremacy, white power, and white history of protecting people like Robert E. Lee when we decide to either name or keep the name or not change the name?
I think just still not entirely clear, but I think, it's a decision that we'll have to make. I think it's all part of this process and how we respond to Charlottesville. But my opinion on
tackling white supremacy as a potential vote for or against with this.
Okay.
that's kind of tough. Maybe I'm not fully grasping it.
So I would say that white supremacy is a form of hatred, right? And I do believe that white supremacy and hatred is a form of ignorance. And if you really look at just at JEB Stuart, some could argue that JEB Stuart helped the North win the war. There's a long story behind that, but JEB Stuart got really lost up in Gettysburg, and because of that, the South lost their first battle. Therefore, JEB Stuart may be directly attributed with the North winning, and therefore, perhaps this whole hatred and lack of information that people have had. Education is everything, and when you get into bigotry, you're into ignorance.
Michael? Well, speaking of ignorance, I think there's a lot of ignorance around Robert E. Lee, and we have disputes about this. But I think I need to say this because our moderator here, I think, promoted a myth here at the beginning that needs to be dispelled, which is that unlike James Longstreet, General James Longstreet, who went to battle the white supremacists in New Orleans after the war, Lee did nothing proactive to heal the wounds of war and conflict. That's a big, big myth. And he did things as president of Washington College, which are quite odious.
All I can say is just to add to that, while I don't claim to be a Lee expert, there are plenty of books, recognized scholarship that do recount those final years in Lee's life, which he did dedicate to education and reconciliation.
Susan Clay, Washington Lee Class of '62, Alumni Association Secretary. 2 quick questions. Number 1, what is the cost? And number 2, from what I understand, the JEB Stuart community voted on names, and the school board chose to ignore their vote. How do we prevent that from happening in Arlington if there is a vote and if there is a change?
So let me see if I got the first one right. So what was the cost? And again, this is where I go back to the speech that I had said here. People that are identified people that are named to identify the cost, make sure that those are the ones that are actually capable of doing so. And when they do that, you put your trust in them, and what that cost is not up for discussion. The argument after the organization and the ad hoc committee and the athletic director identified what the overall anticipated costs were for JEB Stuart for the changing of the name, we came in originally around $560,000. That price, because we had left out certain areas and certain amounts that were not originally incorporated into this, it ballooned up to roughly $800,000 to $900,000. Once we submitted those costs and it became publicly available, those that were wanting to have the name changed, we're coming down as low as this is only going to cost you $25,000 to change the school name. So somehow we went from $25,000 to $980,000. After the school board had met this past week, and this was as of December 11th, it was identified that they're going to set aside or plan to set aside enough funding, or the expectation is going to cost roughly $400,000 to change the name. This is where I have a big problem. They have left out very, very critical components to change the school. They're going to spray paint a turf field that we just spent $1.3 million on to put in that field. Those costs were not included into what the overall change is going to be. So by leaving those out, you're shortchanging your students. Don't do that.
I talked to a school board member this week who told me if the name was changed, the school board might consider phasing in the name over many years to save taxpayer dollars. An example was if the ninth graders have gym uniforms, they wouldn't necessarily be required to change their gym uniforms. So there would be, at least on part of the school board, openness to considering phasing this in over a substantial period of time to save funds.
All right, I see a number of hands, but we are at time. We're actually a little bit past time, so thank you, everybody. Big round of applause for everyone.